The autumn rain drummed steadily against the windows of Kensington Palace as Prince William sat in his private study, reviewing the day's schedule. Papers were scattered across his mahogany desk, each one representing another royal duty, another public appearance, another carefully orchestrated moment in the life of the future King of England. But something felt different today. There was a restlessness in his chest, a nagging feeling that all these formal events and ribbon cuttings weren't quite enough. Princess Kate entered the room quietly, carrying 2 steaming cups of tea. She had learned to read her husband's moods over their years together, and today she could sense his inner turmoil. Setting down his cup, she perched on the arm of his leather chair, her hand finding his shoulder with the practiced ease of a loving wife. "You're thinking again," she said softly, a gentle smile playing at her lips. "That serious look means you're wrestling with something important." William leaned back, allowing himself a moment of vulnerability that only Kate ever witnessed. "I've been reading the letters that come to the palace," he admitted. "Thousands of them. People asking for help, sharing their struggles, telling us about their daily battles with poverty, illness, loneliness. And here we are, living in this bubble, attending galas where a single dinner costs more than some families see in a month." Kate nodded thoughtfully. She had been having similar feelings lately, especially after their recent visit to a children's hospital. The contrast between their privileged life and the real struggles of ordinary people had been weighing on both of them. "What if we did something different?" "One," she suggested quietly. "Something that isn't planned by the palace staff or announced to the media." The idea hung in the air between them like a spark waiting to ignite. William set down his tea and turned to face his wife fully. "You mean something completely private?" "Just us?" "Just us," Kate confirmed. "No photographers, no press releases, no official protocols. Something real." That evening, after their children were tucked into bed, the royal couple found themselves in an unusual position. They were planning not a state visit or charity gala, but something far more personal and meaningful. Kate had pulled out her laptop and was researching local shelters and community centers, while William pored over maps of London's less affluent neighborhoods. "Look at this," Kate said, pointing to her screen. "There's a homeless shelter in East London that's been struggling to stay open. They serve meals to over 200 people every night, but they're running out of funding. The woman who runs it has been volunteering there for 15 years, using her own savings to keep it going." William read over her shoulder, his heart heavy with the weight of the story. The shelter, called Hope House, was located in one of London's most challenging neighborhoods. The director, Margaret Thompson, was a former teacher who had started volunteering after her retirement and gradually took over the entire operation when the previous manager left. "She's 68 years old," Kate continued, scrolling through the article. "She works 16-hour days, sleeps in a small room above the shelter, and hasn't taken a proper holiday in 5 years. The local council is threatening to close the building due to unpaid bills." The more they read, the more determined they became. This wasn't just about writing a check or making a public donation. This was about rolling up their sleeves and doing something that mattered, away from the cameras and the ceremony. Over the next few days, the couple began planning in secret. They researched the shelter's needs, the neighborhood's challenges, and most importantly, they tried to understand what kind of help would actually make a difference. Kate reached out through unofficial channels, using contacts from her pre-royal days to gather information without revealing their identity. What they discovered broke their hearts and strengthened their resolve. Hope House wasn't just feeding the homeless. It was serving as a lifeline for working families who couldn't afford groceries, elderly people who had no one else, and children whose parents were struggling to make ends meet. Margaret Thompson wasn't just running a shelter. She was holding an entire community together, with nothing but determination and compassion. The couple made a decision that would change not only their own lives but also touch the hearts of an entire nation. They would visit Hope House, not as royalty, but as human beings wanting to help. They would work in the kitchen, serve meals, clean tables, and listen to stories. Most importantly, they would do it without any fanfare or publicity. William arranged for 2 days off from official duties, claiming he needed time for private family matters. Kate canceled her upcoming engagements, telling her staff she was feeling unwell. They asked their personal protection officers to maintain distance and dress casually, explaining that they wanted to visit a friend without drawing attention. The plan was simple but unprecedented. On Thursday morning, they would drive to East London in William's personal car, wearing ordinary clothes and hoping to blend in. They would spend the day helping at Hope House, getting to know the people who depended on it and understanding what more could be done. Most importantly, they would do it all without a single photographer or journalist knowing where they were. As Wednesday night arrived, both William and Kate felt a mixture of nervousness and excitement they hadn't experienced in years. They were about to step completely outside their royal bubble, into the real world where their titles meant nothing and only their actions would matter. Kate stood before her wardrobe, selecting the most casual clothes she owned: jeans, a simple sweater, comfortable shoes for standing and working. No jewelry except her wedding ring, no makeup artist, no stylist. For the first time in years, she would present herself to the world exactly as she was. William was making similar preparations, choosing clothes he might wear for a weekend at home. As he looked in the mirror, he saw not the future King of England, but simply a man who wanted to help. The transformation was more than physical. It was emotional and spiritual. That night, as they lay in bed, neither could sleep. They talked quietly about what they hoped to accomplish, what they might learn, and how this experience might change them. They were embarking on something that could potentially cause a constitutional crisis if discovered, but they both knew it was the right thing to do. The palace slept around them, unaware that two of its most important residents were about to embark on a journey that would challenge everything they thought they knew about service, sacrifice, and what it truly meant to serve the people. Thursday morning arrived gray and drizzly, the kind of London weather that seemed to match the somber mood of the East London streets. William drove their ordinary black sedan through traffic, following the GPS directions to Hope House. Kate sat beside him, her hands folded in her lap, occasionally glancing at the changing scenery as they moved from the polished neighborhoods around Kensington into areas where life was visibly more challenging. The streets grew narrower, the buildings older and more weathered. Shop windows displayed signs advertising check-cashing services and discount groceries. People moved with the hurried pace of those balancing multiple jobs and responsibilities, their faces showing the strain of daily survival in an expensive city. Hope House sat on a corner lot, its red brick facade worn but welcoming. A simple sign hung above the entrance, hand-painted letters spelling out the shelter's name, alongside the words, "All are welcome." Through the large windows, they could see people already gathering inside, some sitting at tables, while others formed a queue near what appeared to be a serving area. William parked several blocks away, and together they walked toward the shelter. With each step, they shed a little more of their royal identity and embraced their humanity. Kate had tied her hair back in a simple ponytail, and William wore a baseball cap pulled low over his eyes. To anyone watching, they looked like any other couple volunteering their time. As they approached the entrance, an elderly woman struggled with several heavy bags of groceries. Without hesitation, Kate rushed forward to help, taking two of the bags while William grabbed the others. The woman, surprised by the kindness of strangers, smiled warmly and thanked them repeatedly. This simple interaction set the tone for everything that would follow. Inside Hope House, the atmosphere was one of organized chaos. Margaret Thompson, a silver-haired woman with kind eyes and tireless energy, was directing volunteers while simultaneously comforting a crying child and answering a ringing phone. When she spotted the newcomers, she approached with the practiced efficiency of someone who had learned to quickly assess people and their capabilities. "You must be Kate and William," she said, referring to the names they had given when calling ahead. "Thank goodness you're here. We're expecting over 300 people today, and we're short-handed. Have you worked in a shelter before?" They admitted they hadn't, but expressed their eagerness to learn and help however they could. Margaret's face lit up with relief and gratitude. She quickly assigned them tasks. Kate would help in the kitchen, preparing sandwiches and hot soup, while William would work in the dining area, serving meals and cleaning tables. The kitchen was a hive of activity. Kate found herself standing beside women who had been volunteering at Hope House for years, their hands moving with practiced efficiency as they assembled hundreds of sandwiches. These women shared stories of the people they served, speaking of regular visitors by name and describing their individual circumstances with genuine care and concern. Sarah, a retired nurse who volunteered 3 days a week, told Kate about James, a former construction worker who had lost his job and home after a workplace injury. He comes in every day, always says please and thank you, and he's been looking for work for 8 months. Good man. Just hit a rough patch like any of us could. Another volunteer, Maria, spoke of the families who depended on Hope House's evening meals. There's this little girl, Emma, who comes with her mother. The mum works 2 jobs but still can't make ends meet. Emma always asks if we have any fruit. Says she wants to take an apple to school for lunch. Breaks your heart. As Kate listened to these stories while spreading peanut butter on slice after slice of bread, she began to understand that Hope House was more than a shelter. It was a community. A place where people found not just food, but dignity, conversation, and hope. The volunteers knew their regular visitors' names, their struggles, their small victories. They celebrated when someone found a job and grieved when someone disappeared from their daily routine. Meanwhile, in the dining area, William was having his own revelations. He moved between tables, carrying trays of hot soup and sandwiches, refilling water glasses, and wiping down surfaces. But more than the physical work, he found himself drawn into conversations that changed his entire perspective on poverty and resilience. At one table sat Robert, a man in his 50s, wearing a clean but threadbare coat. He had been a middle manager at a financial firm until budget cuts eliminated his position 3 years earlier. Despite his circumstances, he maintained his dignity and spoke eloquently about the job market challenges facing older workers. It's not that I'm not trying, he explained to William. I apply to 10 jobs a day. But when you're over 50 and have been unemployed for this long, people make assumptions. Another conversation was with Linda, a single mother of 2 who worked nights cleaning offices. She brought her children to Hope House for dinner because it was the one reliable meal she could provide them each day. Despite her exhaustion, she helped other visitors with their problems, translating for those who spoke little English and comforting those who seemed overwhelmed. Her generosity in the face of her own struggles moved William deeply. The hours passed quickly. Kate found herself completely absorbed in the work, her usual awareness of time and protocol fading away. She was simply a woman in a kitchen, contributing to something meaningful alongside other women who had chosen to spend their day helping others. Her hands grew sore from the repetitive motions, but her heart felt fuller than it had in years. As the lunch service wound down, Margaret approached both of them with visible emotion. I can't thank you enough, she said, her voice thick with gratitude. We served 40 more people today than usual, and everything went so smoothly. You two are naturals at this. The compliment meant more to them than any royal accolade they had ever received. They had earned Margaret's praise through genuine effort and contribution, not through birthright or title. For a few hours, they had simply been useful members of a community working toward a common goal. But their day was far from over. As the afternoon shift began, they learned about Hope House's other services. There was a small clothing distribution area where people could find clean, donated items. There was a corner with computers where visitors could search for jobs or stay in contact with family members. There was even a small library where children could read while their parents ate or attended to other needs. Kate volunteered to help in the clothing area, where she met Patricia, a social worker who donated her time to help people navigate the complex system of government assistance and social services. Patricia explained how difficult it was for people to maintain their dignity while seeking help, and how important it was for volunteers to treat everyone with respect and compassion. People don't choose to be homeless or hungry, Patricia explained while they folded donated clothes. They find themselves in impossible situations through job loss, illness, domestic violence, or just the high cost of living in London. What they need most isn't pity, but practical help and human connection. William spent the afternoon learning about the shelter's financial challenges. Margaret showed him the books, the unpaid bills, the constant struggle to keep the electricity on and the refrigerators running. The numbers were staggering. It cost nearly £10,000 per month to operate Hope House, money that came from small donations, charity grants, and Margaret's own savings. "I'll be honest with you," Margaret confessed, as they sat in her tiny office above the shelter. "I'm not sure how much longer I can keep this going. The rent has gone up, food costs have increased, and donations are down. I've mortgaged my own house twice to keep us open. But I'm running out of options." The desperation in her voice was heartbreaking, but so was her determination. This woman had dedicated her retirement years to serving others, sacrificing her own security for the sake of people society often ignored. She represented the best of human nature, the kind of selfless service that deserved support and recognition. As evening approached, and their first day at Hope House came to an end, both William and Kate felt fundamentally changed. They had worked harder than they had in years, their bodies tired, but their spirits energized. They had connected with people in ways that their royal duties rarely allowed, hearing real stories and witnessing genuine human resilience. The drive home through London's evening traffic was quiet, both of them processing what they had experienced. They had glimpsed a different world, one where their privileged background meant nothing, and only their willingness to work and care mattered. It was a world they wanted to be part of, regardless of the protocol challenges it might create. Friday morning found William and Kate returning to Hope House with renewed energy and a deeper sense of purpose. They had spent the previous evening discussing what they had learned and felt more committed than ever to making a real difference. This time, they brought with them not just their willingness to work, but also some carefully chosen supplies they had purchased with their own money. Industrial-grade cleaning supplies, fresh ingredients for the kitchen, and warm blankets for the cold London nights ahead. Margaret greeted them with tears in her eyes. During the night, the shelter's aging boiler had broken down, leaving the building without heat, just as winter was approaching. The repair estimate was £3,000, money that simply didn't exist in Hope House's budget. She was facing the impossible choice between fixing the heating and keeping the shelter open for another month. Without hesitation, William quietly arranged for a heating engineer to visit that morning, paying for the repair himself. When Margaret tried to thank him, he simply said that everyone deserved to be warm and that it was the least he could do. His casual generosity, delivered without fanfare or expectation of recognition, embodied the kind of leadership that came from the heart rather than obligation. As they settled into their second day of work, both William and Kate noticed things they had missed during their first visit. They saw how the regular visitors had formed their own small community within the shelter, looking out for each other and sharing resources. They witnessed small acts of kindness between people who had very little to give. An elderly man saving part of his sandwich for someone who arrived late, a young mother helping an immigrant family communicate with the staff, teenagers voluntarily cleaning up after themselves and others. Kate found herself working closely with a group of volunteers who had been coming to Hope House for years. These weren't wealthy philanthropists making token appearances. They were ordinary people who had made service to others a regular part of their lives. There was David, a bus driver who spent his days off making soup for the shelter. There was Jenny, a single mother who brought her own children to help because she wanted them to understand how fortunate they were and how important it was to help others. The stories these volunteers shared revealed the true impact of Hope House on the community. They spoke of people who had gotten back on their feet with the shelter's help, finding jobs and housing after months of struggle. They talked about elderly visitors who found companionship and purpose in the shelter's community, and children who learned to read in the small library area. William spent much of the morning talking with visitors about their experiences and needs. What he learned challenged many of his assumptions about poverty and homelessness. Many of the people seeking help at Hope House were employed but couldn't afford London's high cost of living. Others were dealing with mental health challenges or recovering from illnesses that had derailed their financial stability. Still others were simply elderly people whose pensions weren't sufficient to cover both rent and food. One conversation particularly moved him. He met Arthur, a 75-year-old former teacher who came to Hope House for both meals and companionship. Arthur lived alone in a small flat and survived on a pension that forced him to choose between heating his home and eating properly. But more than the financial struggle, Arthur spoke about the loneliness of modern life and how Hope House had become his social center. "It's not just the food," Arthur explained as they sat together over lunch. "It's having somewhere to go, where people know your name and care if you don't show up." Margaret asks about my health. "The volunteers remember that I like extra vegetables in my soup. When you're old and alone, that kind of attention makes you feel human again." As the afternoon progressed, Kate noticed a commotion near the entrance. A young woman had arrived with 3 small children, all of them clearly distressed. The woman was crying quietly while trying to comfort her kids, who appeared tired and hungry. Margaret immediately approached them, her grandmother instincts taking over, as she knelt down to speak to the children at their level. Kate learned that the family had been evicted that morning after the mother lost her job due to childcare issues. They had nowhere to go and no money for food or temporary housing. The woman, whose name was Rebecca, was 26 years old and had been working 2 part-time jobs while studying for a nursing degree. When her childcare arrangement fell through, she missed too many shifts and lost both positions. Without thinking about protocol or propriety, Kate sat with Rebecca and her children, listening to their story and offering what comfort she could. The children, ages 3, 5, and 7, gradually warmed up to this kind stranger who seemed to genuinely care about their situation. The youngest, a little girl named Sophie, eventually climbed into Kate's lap and fell asleep, exhausted from the stress of the day. While Kate comforted the family, William was quietly making phone calls, using his contacts to find temporary housing and childcare resources. His years of royal connections suddenly had practical value as he reached out to housing charities and support services. By evening, he had secured temporary accommodation for Rebecca's family and connected her with a job placement service that specialized in helping single parents find flexible employment. The family situation highlighted one of the most important things William and Kate learned during their time at Hope House. Poverty wasn't a character flaw or a choice, but a complex web of circumstances that could trap anyone. Rebecca was educated, hardworking, and devoted to her children, but a series of unfortunate events had led her to a homeless shelter. Her story could have been anyone's story, given the right combination of bad luck and limited resources. As their second day at Hope House came to an end, Margaret pulled them aside for a private conversation. She had figured out who they were sometime during their first day, but had chosen to say nothing, appreciating their desire to serve without recognition. Now, she wanted to express her gratitude not for their royal status, but for their genuine commitment and hard work. "In 40 years of social work," she told them quietly, "I've met many well-meaning people who wanted to help, but most of them wanted to write a check, attend a fundraiser, or have their picture taken. You two rolled up your sleeves and worked. You listened to people's stories without judging them. You treated everyone with dignity and respect. That's what real service looks like." Her words carried weight because they came from someone who had dedicated her life to helping others. Margaret had no agenda beyond keeping Hope House running and serving those who needed it most. Her validation meant more than any positive press coverage or royal approval they had ever received. That evening, as they prepared to leave Hope House for what they assumed would be the last time, something unexpected happened. Word had somehow leaked that 2 volunteers at the shelter bore a striking resemblance to the Duke and Duchess of Cambridge. A small crowd had gathered outside, not seeking autographs or photos, but wanting to express their gratitude for the help Hope House provided. Among the crowd were people William and Kate recognized from their 2 days of service. Arthur was there, along with Rebecca and her children, Robert, the former manager, Linda, the night shift cleaner, and dozens of others. They had come not because royalty was present, but because they wanted to support the shelter that supported them. What happened next would be talked about for years to come. Without any prompting from staff or security, the crowd began sharing stories about what Hope House meant to them. They spoke about meals when they were hungry, kindness when they felt forgotten, and hope when circumstances seemed impossible. They talked about Margaret's tireless dedication and the volunteers who gave their time freely. One by one, people stepped forward to contribute what they could to keep Hope House running. Arthur offered his pension for the week. Rebecca promised to volunteer once she got back on her feet. A teenager who had been helped by the shelter's job placement service handed over his first week's wages. Even people who had very little found ways to give something back. As William and Kate watched this spontaneous outpouring of generosity, they realized they were witnessing something extraordinary. These weren't wealthy donors seeking tax benefits or social recognition. These were people who understood struggle and want, yet they were giving freely to ensure that others wouldn't face that struggle alone. The crowd's generosity inspired others to step forward. Neighbors who had never visited Hope House learned about its mission and offered to help. Local business owners pledged ongoing support. A retired contractor volunteered to handle maintenance issues. Within hours, a community had formed around the simple idea that everyone deserved food, shelter, and dignity. By the time the evening ended, Hope House had received enough donations and commitments to operate for the next 6 months. More importantly, it had gained a network of supporters who understood its value and would work to ensure its continued existence. The shelter that had been on the verge of closing was now positioned for growth and expanded service. The experience changed William and Kate profoundly. They returned to their royal duties with a deeper understanding of service and a renewed commitment to using their position to highlight the work of people like Margaret Thompson. More importantly, they had discovered that the most meaningful moments in their privileged lives came not from ceremony or protocol, but from simple human connection and genuine service to others. Their 2 days at Hope House became a turning point, not just in their own lives, but in how they approached their royal responsibilities. They had learned that true leadership meant getting your hands dirty, listening to people's stories, and working alongside others for the common good. It was a lesson that would influence every public engagement and charitable commitment for the rest of their lives. The story of their secret service at Hope House eventually became public. But by then, it didn't matter. What mattered was that they had found their authentic selves in the most unlikely place, and in doing so, had inspired an entire nation to reconsider what service and sacrifice really meant. Their tears of joy at Hope House had indeed brought tears to people across the nation, but they were tears of hope and renewed faith in human kindness.